I mean, that's the one that deals with proportionality and this idea that the human being straddles these two abysses, the abyss of nothingness and from which he came, and the abyss of infinity by whom he came. And he argues in there that only God can know both nothing and infinity. We're incapable of that. And it seems to me that nihilism is people that are looking at the nothing and forget about the infinity. And they've, in a sense, turned their back on that. And Frost has a wonderful poem about the people that look out at the sea. They cannot look out far, they cannot look in deep, but whenever was that anything that prevented them from doing it? And it seems to me that, you know, the nihilist is looking, instead of looking at the ocean of infinity, he's looking at the wasteland on the shore. He's looking the other way. And I think is that our children, and Plato reminded us that give me the stories you tell your children and I'll give you your culture, that our children are growing up on a type of popular culture that is so corrosive. And over time, I can't see how they could not fall into a type of despair, that the meaninglessness of life that's presented to them constantly, that would be the result. How can we be better at doing what I think Comte has an essay on apeirokalia, and Leo Strauss uses that term when he talks about liberal education, the idea that vulgarity, which our culture has become very vulgar, and vulgarity for the Greeks was apeirokalia. It was inexperience in things beautiful. How do we restore beauty to a culture that seems to have really lost it? Because our language is based on the richness of its literature and its poetry, and there's something in rhetoric, as you well know, called copia, which is this idea of acquiring a fund of expression through deep reading. I think the loss of the ability to read is really something tragic in our culture. I know just for a fact, in dealing with students and testing them on very difficult sentences, that because they don't have grammar, they end up getting lost in difficult sentences and not really being able to see what main clauses are. And I think when a civilization, you know, the difference between a civilization and Islam and Christianity are founded on books. And arguably even the great pagan civilizations were founded on books. There is no Socrates or Plato without Homer. And so books are always at the root of a civilization. If we lose the ability to access books through the loss of language, through the impoverishment of vocabulary and these things, I don't see how we can have a rule of law, which is based on a deep study of language, because Reading Law is a great book by Scalia, just about the importance of knowing how to read deeply so that you can ascertain what laws mean. We're having a debate now about textualists and originalists that try to understand what exactly does this mean and how do we interpret it. So I'm still looking for some answers about how because Barry Sanders wrote a book that I read years ago called A is for Ox, Why Our Children Are Dying to Read. And John Taylor Gatto told me, the great teacher from New York, he told me that he taught in inner cities, he taught in Harlem, and he said that it was so difficult to when the students were all collectively together, because they postured about not wanting to, I don't need this knowledge. But he said when he got them in private, they were dying to read. They wanted literacy. And that gets back to all men by nature, or human beings, desire to know. I think, and that gets right to shows about nothing, because that Columbia program, which John Erskine started, and the reason that he started that program was the fact that he saw that the elective system, of which there was an immense amount of resistance when it was first introduced at Harvard, he saw that students no longer were speaking to each other, that there were students that were specializing in this and specializing in that. And that troubled him. So he started that core program. One of the problems today is that core program, which is so incredibly rich, and really, despite the fact that a large part of it is Western, it was informed by so many different civilizations. As you know, Aquinas was reading Avicenna, he was reading Ghazali, he was reading Farabi, he was certainly reading Averroes. Ibn Rushd was a major source for him in understanding Aristotle. He disagreed with him on some things, but people forget that he saw him as certainly Albertus Magnus, his teacher, was a great Averroist. Yeah. And so we forget that this is civilization that we got. In fact, I think Aristotle says that the reason mathematics developed in Egypt was because they gave the priests leisure time so they could actually think about things. And this is something that I think our leisure time, which was meant to develop our souls and to refine our hearts, has been reduced to shows about nothing. So I think a lot of people, in the end, I think people, they lose this immense opportunity that we have here, this short time that we tarry here. And the Quran's first commandment was read, iqra, to read. And I think Islam, like Christianity, developed an incredible civilization of literacy. And that's why one of the things that Jacques Barzun in his book, From Dawn to Decadence, he has a chapter about what he called primitivism. The kind of Rousseauian fallacy where people look at very primitive life as some kind of an ideal. And I think that to me is a great tragedy, because the life of the mind, the fact that we are unique amongst creation in that we do have minds, and we have this ability to grapple with nothing and infinity as concepts, which is something that the God who created our imaginations gave us those imaginations to be able to do that. And that's something so extraordinary. And to squander this incredible opportunity, I feel for our young people, because they're given relativism in schools, they're taught doctrines that this really is meaningless, and then they're told, on the other hand, about rights that they never ground in anything. Nietzsche, who was dealing with the collapse of metaphysics amongst the Europeans, he wrote in the Collapse of Cosmological Values that he gives these three different degrees of nihilism or nihilism, and he says that the second one is a loss of a holistic view of the universe. This is where nihilism arises out of. It arises out of this loss. And in The Discarded Image, I mean, that's one of the things that C.S. Lewis talks about, is that the thing he envied most about the pre-moderns is they really had worked it all out and had such a holistic view of the world and understood it within that holism. And so getting back to that, being whole again, I mean, it's interesting that healthy comes from whole. The root of that word is from the same root that we get whole from. To be healthy is to be whole. And it seems that we're so fragmented. Neil Postman wrote a very interesting book, in my estimation, called Amusing Ourselves to Death. A very prescient book, despite the fact that all the signs and symptoms were there at the time. But it was really about popular discourse in the age of show business. How do we overcome the reality television show about nothing that our political discourse has become? One. And the second, for all of these people that are really having a difficult time in isolation. And what's interesting about Kierkegaard says that to the ancients, isolation was a great gift. He said the only thing that modern people can think about doing with it is to punish people. Like you put them in prison, they go into isolation. But it was the ancients the sannyasi wanted to go off to the mountain. The monk wanted to go off to the cell. The Muslim wanted to go into khalwa. So the Prophet ﷺ went and isolated himself on the Ghar Hira. Pascal does say that the unhappiness of our species is due to the fact that we're unable to sit alone with ourselves in our rooms.